This guy won 6 world titles, Olympic gold. He had wins over Duran, Ernst, Hagler, 3 of the most dangerous fighters who ever lived. When I reflect on what I miss most about my boxing career, it isn't the noise in the arena, or the articles in the papers, or the camaraderie in camp. I miss the hours and hours of searching for ways to exploit my opponent's weaknesses. Every opponent to him was a puzzle, and Ray's entire career was built on one idea: the fight is won or lost before the bell even rings. And this episode is about that system, is about where it came from, how he built it, and how he used it to beat men who had no business losing to him. And yeah, this is where Ray fell completely in love with preparation, not with boxing, but with the daily process of getting better. And Kobe Bryant did something almost identical with film. He said, "I was a scrawny kid. I knew for me to get any type of edge whatsoever, I had to be more prepared than the person I was matching up against." And so he then prepared for his pre-season exhibition game against Dallas in the same way he'd prepare for a championship. He would have hours of film study on players like Jimmy Jackson and Jason Kidd. And the first time Jackson spun on him, Kobe picked the ball clean. He said it was only a pre-season game, but he prepared for it like it was the state championship. And he says this: "It's a blueprint, so if something goes down, it's not something you haven't seen before." While I waited for Haggler to make his decision, I didn't waste any time. If I was to be at my best, and it would take my best to outduel a man whose last loss was in March 1976, before I competed in the Olympics, I'd have to train harder and smarter. In the 4 years since beating Finch, I had fought just once, for a total of 26 minutes and 32 seconds. In boxing, they have saying that the punch that you don't see coming is the one that knocks you out. The punch that you don't see coming. You know, if you're preparing like he did for Benitez's best punches and best attributes, if you're preparing for everything that you can do, then you can expect everything, and visualization is a key to that as well. When I reflect on what I miss most about my boxing career, it isn't the noise in the arena, or the articles in the papers, or the camaraderie in camp. I miss the hours and hours of searching for ways to exploit my opponent's weaknesses. That is from the book Ray Leonard. Already done an episode on this. This guy won 6 world titles, Olympic gold. He had wins over Duran, Ernst, Haggler, 3 of the most dangerous fighters who ever lived. And what he misses most about all of it isn't the winning, it's the hunting, it's the figuring out, it's the psychological warfare. Every opponent to him was a puzzle, and Ray's entire career was built on one idea: the fight is won or lost before the bell even rings. And this episode is about that system, is about where it came from, how he built it, and how he used it to beat men who had no business losing to him. Before we get into the system itself, we need to go back to where it started, because the obsession didn't begin with world titles or Olympic glory. It began in rec centre in Maryland with no ring, one speed bag, and a cracked dresser mirror. The program was not exactly the state of the art. There was no actual ring, and there would not be one until 1976. Our practices were held on 4 mats spread out on a hard wooden floor, which made maintaining a proper balance important, and they were cut short to make room for basketball. We used only one speed bag, 2 heavy bags, and a cracked dresser mirror for shadow boxing. The next Joe Louis wasn't coming out of this dive. And yeah, this is where Ray fell completely in love with preparation, not with boxing, but with the daily process of getting better. I relished every aspect of this process, from the 5-mile runs in the dark and the cold, to the jabs I threw from one end of the court to the other, to the consistent pounding of the speed and heavy bags. After school, I couldn't wait to get to the gym to see if I was any sharper with my punches or quicker with my footwork. I also developed my own special workout routine, in which I sometimes ran to school instead of taking the bus. The other kids assumed I was crazy, and maybe I was, but I needed to believe the extra effort would pay off someday. So what drove him wasn't the natural talent. He'd failed at basketball, track and wrestling. He tried all these sports. Boxing was the first thing he was actually good at, and that made him obsessive about it. What drove me was the power it instilled, the sense that I was in control. Instead of being a victim in the ring, for the first time in my life, I felt I could conquer any force. Strange, isn't it? The ring is where men try to do great harm to one another, and where I felt the safest. So I've already touched this in the last episode, and I won't dive too deep into it here, but Ray came from a background of violence everywhere around him. Palmer Park, where he grew up, it was violent on the streets. It was violent in his own household with his mum. Yes, his dad would cheat on his mum. She would get angry, and his dad would whip him and his brothers. So all he knew was violence. So when he got good at boxing, he started noticing this power and control that he had, he got a buzz off of it. So his coach, Dave Jacobs, had a projector at his house, and he would show the boys footage of Willie Pep, Jersey Joe Walcott, Shirley Robinson. These are all legendary greats of boxing, and they would break them down one by one and try and figure out what made each of them great. And Ray was absorbing all of this as a kid. Long before he had opponents worth even studying, he was already building this habit of watching, analysing, and learning. And again, I speak about this in every athlete. For every athlete, they have an obsession with the craft that starts early and it never shuts off. And it reminds me of Maradona. He described the same pool as a boy in Fiorito. We would always be there in the Potrero, running after the ball. Saturdays and Sundays were spent like that all day long, weekdays too, but only from 5 o'clock, because during the day I had to go to school. Everything I did, every step I took was because of the ball. If the torta sent me on an errand, I would take with me anything that resembled a ball. It could be an orange or scrumpled up paper or cloths, and I would go up into the steps, onto the bridge that crossed the railway, hopping on one foot, the right one, tack, tack, tack. That's how I walked to school as well. So it's a different sport, different country, but they had the same obsession, and it took part of their life, and they couldn't switch it off even when because they didn't want to. I guess quite inspiring as well. So we look at Ray. He mentions that the gym that he was in, they only had one speed bag, two heavy bags, and they didn't even have a ring. And you look at Maradona, and he's saying that he would use anything he could, a scrumple up paper or a cloth, to turn into a football and play with it. So it just shows that anyone coming from a poor background, there are ways that you can become better, and I would take these as inspiration, because if they can do it, I mean, they are one in a million. But I think it inspires every kid out there to do what they can with what they have. So there's a part of the Sugar Ray story that almost nobody talks about, and it's one of the most important parts. Ray's coaches told him something very early, and their weight class at that time, skills alone wouldn't make you rich. So any of the lower weight classes like lightweight, welterweight, middleweight, I mean, they're all prominent weight classes now, but back then the heavyweights took all the money. The smaller guys had to find another way to stand out, and that's where a man named Roland Kenner comes in. Knowing how to box wasn't enough. I needed to learn how to communicate, and that's where Roland Keller came in. Roland ran Dave's Supper Club in Glenarden, where I made a couple of bucks helping out a few days a week. He told me and Derek Holmes that since only the heavyweights made any serious money as pros, we had to set ourselves apart from others in our weight class, and the surest way to accomplish this was to be smart and articulate, dispelling the image in white America of the black prize fighter who could do nothing else in life. Roland conducted mock interviews with us on old reel-to-reel tapes, demonstrating how to look into a camera and answer questions. Mr. Leonard, what will you do after you retire from the sport? How will you change your strategy in the ring if your first plan of attack doesn't work? We also learned to dodge any questions to which we did not know the answers. And Ray didn't see the point at first, but he kept going, and slowly it clicked. Over time, I saw the wisdom of what Roland preached and worked on my responses every night before I went to bed. My delivery grew slower, my answers made sense. I never stopped working on this area of self-improvement, just as I never had stopped practicing my left jab and right uppercut. Years later, after turning pro, I spent a few minutes almost every day with a dictionary, picking up as many new words as I could. So every night he was working on his words the same way he would work on his punches. And Kobe Bryant did something almost identical with film. He said, I was a scrawny kid. I knew for me to get any type of edge whatsoever, I had to be more prepared than the person I was matching up against. And so he then prepared for his preseason exhibition game against Dallas in the same way he'd prepare for a championship. He would have hours of film study on players like Jimmy Jackson and Jason Kidd. And the first time Jackson spun on him, Kobe picked the ball clean. He already knew it was coming. He said it was only a preseason game, but he prepared for it like it was the state championship. And he says this, it's a blueprint. So if something goes down, it's not something you haven't seen before. Everybody's got tendencies. If he scores 40 on Monday, he's going to try doing it on Tuesday. You've got to take him out of his spots. That's the key. So that's the mindset that these greats have. No such thing as a small game. Everything is important. There's no such thing as small preparation. You have to do it every time for everything, because the habit that you have to do, it's not conditional. You have to do it all the time. It's unconditional. So as the opponents got better, Ray's preparation got more detailed, and the foundation of everything for him was film study. And he says this, I always felt that the write-ups in the papers did nothing to enlighten me about a fighter's strengths or weaknesses. I saw what I needed to see on film, and it was not just their footwork and punching tendencies that provided important clues, it was the words they chose and the tone they adopted in interviews. Was there the slightest sign of fear in their voice or in their eyes, and if so, how could I take advantage of it? So he wasn't just watching how they moved, he was watching how they talked, how they carried themselves. He was reading their words for any psychological cracks. It was only when I saw the grainy black and white footage on the screen that I could begin to anticipate how a fight might play out. Round by round, I was trying to solve a riddle. If I figured it out, the other man was in trouble. If I didn't, I was. And so, against Benitez, his first world title fight, this is what the film gave him. So these are two specific details that he picked up just from film study. Two weapons that Benitez obviously had, and the entire fight plan was built, you know, in a dark room watching this type of grainy footage. Again, I need to mention again, but Kobe took this exact same approach in basketball. As a kid, I would work tirelessly on adding elements to my game. I would see something I liked in person or in film, go practice it immediately, practice it more the next day, and then go out and use it. By the time I reached the league, I had a short learning curve. I could see something, download it, and have it down pat. So what Ray did in boxing, that's what Kobe did in basketball. And it was the same discipline. It was, you know, the sport changes, but obsession with knowing the opponent before you face them, that stays the same, and it applies across all different sports. In boxing, they have a saying that the punch that you don't see coming is the one that knocks you out. The punch that you don't see coming, you know, if you're preparing like he did for Benitez's best, you know, best punches and best attributes. If he's preparing for everything that he can do, then he can expect everything, and visualization is a key to that as well. So the film told Ray what he needed to do, and the gym told him if he could actually do it because he'd practice. But the one thing that gets overlooked is how specifically he trained for each opponent, not just to get fit, but to build the exact tools that each fight demanded. For Hearns, he needed to handle Tommy's jab, a punch described as a 12-gauge shotgun that never stopped firing. He was brought into camp like several others who were tall because his style and build resembled Tommy's, especially in how he threw his left jab. The objective with daily repetition was to develop the muscle memory so that I would instinctively avoid Tommy's jab. It was a shot that blinded you for an instant, setting up his money punch. So muscle memory, and you wanted to prepare for Tommy's jab, training his body to avoid it automatically without even thinking, so that in the moment of the fight, he could redirect all his focus elsewhere. And another thing that Ray done was that he sparred 5-minute rounds as well instead of the standard 3 to build stamina beyond what the fight would actually ask of him. And he also, again, really interesting, is he took dancing lessons or tap dancing before Duran to improve his footwork flexibility. He would run 5 miles every morning at 5 o'clock in combat boots. He'd done a number of things that he throughout his career to try and improve himself. There's one ritual that he kept doing throughout his entire career, and it was always the night before a major fight. As usual, there was only one way to find out. I got up and went into the bathroom to look in the mirror. I checked the muscles in my arms and legs. They were bulging. I checked the speed of my flurries. They were fast. I began the final check, the one to tell me if I would be Sugar Ray or Ray. I got the answer I was praying for. My eyes were wide and clear. So Sugar Ray or Ray, the fighter or the man. And before the Duran fight, the one he lost, he looked and felt nothing, and he already knew, you know, it wasn't going to be a good fight. And Tiger Woods had a similar internal calibration. He would say, I don't believe in motivation. I believe in discipline and preparation. And his preparation was ritualistic to a level where most people can't even comprehend. The guy was a different animal. He was a beast. One of the most dominant eras of any sports. What he would do, he would study whole locations at Augusta National months in advance where the Masters is played, and he would map optimal landing zone based on pin position and wind patterns that hadn't even been announced yet, so he'd be preparing in advance, and he would keep detailed logs, not just of shots, but of the green speed, the grain direction, and the temperature, and you'd play this with the same intensity for every round, regardless of the scoreboard. And he said this: have a maniacal work ethic. You want to over-prepare so that luck becomes a product of design. So it shows the best performers don't show up hoping they're ready. They know whether they are before they even walk out of the door. So one of the things I want to mention is, before all of it, before the titles, before the Olympic gold, before any of the big names, there was one fight that built the foundation of everything, and that was with Bobby Magruder, the toughest amateur fighter in the DC region, and his story is worth mentioning. Bobby Magruder was one of the toughest in the DC region. Bobby, a white guy of Irish and Scottish descent, was a featherweight with the power of a middleweight. His father deserted him and his mum when he was only 10 years old. By the time he was 11 or 12, he was fighting once a month in illegal bouts in a strip club called The Cave in Waldorf, Maryland. As Bobby duked it out against the sons of farmers and truck drivers from outside the state, girls wearing only bikinis performed on swings overhead. Bobby earned 50 cents for every victory. To buy a 10-cent can of soup, he rounded up 5 Coke bottles a day, collecting 2 cents per deposit. And then Bobby's story gets even harder. In 1966, at the age of 15, he was preparing for another one of those battles when he lost nearly everything. A car belonging to a member of the gang he and his buddies were about to rumble with purposely ran into him, pinning Bobby against another vehicle. Both of his legs were crushed. The left leg so badly that doctors were planning to amputate, until they met a Magruder who made Bobby seem meek in comparison. "You're not taking my son's leg," his mother insisted. For about a year, because his family did not own a car, he walked the entire 6 miles back and forth every day to receive physical therapy. And Ray was picked to fight Bobby last minute after his opponent pulled out, and Ray beat him, and then he beat him twice more. So that belief, that complete preparation against a Hartsville opponent at the time, proved that he could beat anyone, and that's where it all started. You know what? Plaudits to Bobby McGruder. Like, no one will know his name. They'll only know him if they read this book and if they've heard Sugar Ray talk about him. But there's probably so many stories out there in boxing where you have guys like him who are just fighting, for pennies on the dollar. And it's actually one of the reasons why Marvin Hagler hated Sugar Ray Leonard. Imran Khan had the exact same experience. He was humiliated at a trial session when he was 16. He was rejected as a batsman, and then he was mocked by his senior teammates on his first ever England tour. And they said he'd be lucky to get into the B team of a club. And then he made this decision in that very moment. "I vowed to prove them wrong. I would go back to the drawing board and sort out my bowling action. I'd make myself indispensable to the side as an all-rounder, even if it meant working myself into the ground." And that's the same thing Bobby Magruder did for Ray. The right opponent at the right moment shows you what you're capable of and what you still need to build. So everything I've described comes together in the Haggler fight, and I want to go through it because it's the single most complete example of preparation I found in studying Sugar Ray Leonard in this sport. And so I want to add some context first. Ray had fought once in 4 years by the time he'd fought Hagler. Hagler hadn't lost since 1976, before Ray even competed in the Olympics. He had 67 boxing writers. So 67 boxing writers were polled, 60 chose Hagler, 52 said by knockout. By every measure, he had no business winning. So only 7 boxing writers thought that Sugar Ray could win. So he started preparing before Haggler had even agreed to the fight, because Haggler was making him wait on his decision. While I waited for Haggler to make his decision, I didn't waste any time. If I was to be at my best, and it would take my best to outduel a man whose last loss was in March 1976, before I competed in the Olympics, I'd have to train harder and smarter. In the 4 years since beating Finch, I had fought just once, for a total of 26 minutes and 32 seconds. So he needed to look like a legitimate middleweight because Haggler was naturally heavier, and so he didn't want to look like a welterweight pretending, and so this is what he did. Day by day, it started to form. In the arms, the thighs, the biceps, everywhere. I was becoming a legitimate middleweight. It was an odd feeling to see a different person in the mirror, yet the eyes were the same. Hungry, angry, alive, and that's what mattered most. And then he sent a spy into Hagler's training camp, which apparently was normal back in the day. JD agreed to spy for us at Hagler's camp in Palm Springs, California. He dyed his hair grey, put on horn ring glasses, and secured the photo and an autograph to boot. For 3 solid days, JD watched Haggler work out. He did come up with one fascinating insight I'd use on fight night. He noticed that just before the bell would sound to begin every round, Haggler would go stand in the middle of the ring as if to declare, "This is my territory, pal. I dare you to try to take it away from me." I decided that if I accomplished nothing else at Caesar's Palace, I would reach the centre of the ring before he did. So he found one detail from 3 days of surveillance that his friend had, and Ray built a psychological weapon from it. And then the media tour happened. There were 7 weeks, 12 cities, and Ray used every single press conference as an extension of that preparation. From that day forward, everything I said to the reporters over the following 5 months was designed to work on Hagler's psyche. I felt it was his weakest part. I was measuring the same way I measured fighters in the ring, looking for an opening and pouncing on it. For the press conference in Manhattan, for instance, I wore a jacket that had shoulder pads to create the illusion of being as cut and muscular as possible to show Hagler he wouldn't be able to overpower me. And then Haggler wasn't the same as Sugar Ray. He didn't like the limelight. He didn't talk speaking. He didn't, like the media stuff. And so he would show up late. He hated every press conference. And when Ray confronted him privately about it, this is what happened. So Haggler eventually quit the tour after 6 cities, and Ray took the stage alone in Chicago and played both parts. This is what happened. "Ray, what was your strategy before the fight?" "Well, Marvin, I'm glad you asked." The audience loved it. And then the weigh-in happened. Both he and I were asked to wait off to the side while the others stepped onto the scales. I went first, Haggler patiently waiting as I came in at 158 pounds, but when it was his turn to be weighed, I walked away. I was letting him know that while he was a champ, I wasn't going to give an inch. And so then the fight night happened, first bell rang, and then Ray executes the spy's report immediately. When the bell rang for round 1, I accomplished my first goal. I beat Haggler to the centre of the ring. I felt like putting up a flag. And then so round 4, Ray threw a bolo punch near Hagler's groin to irritate him, and then Hagler responds, "Fight like a man, bitch, fight like a man." And then Ray said nothing, he just kept moving, kept boxing. And then before the final round, Ray had one more detail working for him, something he'd arranged with his corner before fight night. Before the fight, I had instructed Ollie to shout 30 whenever there were 30 seconds left in a round. I would then throw as many flurries as possible in hopes of leaving the judges with a positive impression that might help me secure the round. So that's really clever, actually, to sway the judges' minds like that and almost leave an impression that you're controlling the fight when you might not be. So he's essentially managing the scorecards round by round. You'd even plan that. And so in the very last seconds of the very last round, he said, "As the bell rang, I could not resist getting inside Hagler's head one last time. 'Want to fight me now?' I said. 'Want to fight me?' They were the only words I said to him the entire fight." I thought I must have been infuriated. Anyone that knows Hagler, oh man, like imagine that. You're getting just bombarded. This cheeky little rat is speaking to you, chatting shit to your face. And he's doing it right at the end as well. Oh, it must be infuriating. And, you know, it explains a lot why Hagler hated him too. You know, he's not alive anymore. He died a few years ago. But, you know, he did not like Ray right to the very end. There was definitely a grudge held on his part. So, and this explains it. So Ray ran into him once in a bathroom in Las Vegas 6 months later after the fight, and he tried to make conversation. And this is what Hagler did. He threw water on his face, gave me a cold stare, and walked off without responding. So he was, you know, he didn't think that he lost. He thought he had won. Even though Ray in his head, he thought he outmaneuvered Hagler in that fight. Hagler went to his deathbed saying that he actually beat Ray in that fight. And I've watched that fight and it is very close. It's very hard to judge it, to be honest. You know, if I watch it and different days, I'll think Hagler won, and other days I'll think Sugar Ray won. But, you know, it's that good a fight that it's worth watching more than once. And this is what Ray said later. "If the fight with Tommy was my greatest achievement in the ring, the fight with Haggler was my proudest. I was not at my best. I was nowhere near my best ever again after I beat Tommy. I don't care who you are. You can't take 3 years off in this sport, which asks for everything you have, and expect to come back and be the same. Ali couldn't. I couldn't. Yet the will deep inside me did come back for one night, and that was enough." So when the lesson behind all of this, I guess, is when people talk about Sugar Ray Leonard, they talk about the hands, the attributes they had, the speed, the footwork, the charisma. It was all very important. It was stuff that he had practiced, but none of that is what beat Duran in the rematch. None of that is what beat Hearns in round 13 with his eyes nearly shut and the fight slipping away. And it's not what beat Hagler either. What beat them was the work that happened before they even saw him, before they even fought him. And Kobe Bryant said this as well: "You have to work hard in the dark to shine in the light, and also have a maniacal work ethic. You want to over prepare so that luck becomes a product of design." You know, there's a common saying that I've said over and over again in my episodes. The public praises you for what you practice in private, and that's exactly what Kobe's saying. You have to work hard in the dark to shine in the light. Nobody sees you training in the dark. Nobody sees you bent over, tired, puking up, sick, in pain, aching. That's not what they see. But when you shine in the light, it looks like it's just all natural. It just all comes easy to you when it doesn't. And so what Ray did for his entire career, you know, he set the spy in Palm Springs. He had shoulder pads at a press conference to make himself look bigger than he was. He sparred 5-minute rounds, even done tap dancing. None of it was visible in fight night. All of it determined the result. And it started with Bobby Magruder, a kid fighting in a strip club for, you know, 50 cents a win. It's horrid and really sad. But he was the toughest man in DC, and it was the fight that nobody remembers, but the lesson that Ray never forgot. And I'll end it with this. In later years, there would be famous tussles against such legends as Duran and Hearns and Hagler, with much larger stakes, but no fight ever meant more to me than the triumph over Bobby Magruder. By defeating the man in DC, I became the man, and if I could beat Bobby, I could beat anybody. And that's Sugar Ray Leonard, the story that I was trying to tell in this episode, which is the psychological warfare, that the extra work that Ray would put in into his opponents, the studies that he would do. Really worth reading. It's a short book. It's not long. It's, you know, 270 pages. Really great read. I'd highly recommend it. So I hope you enjoyed that episode. That's one legend down. The work continues.